Sir Alistair McIntyre was Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies between 1988 and 1998, exactly 10 years. Sir Alistair has had a most interesting sojourn at the University of the West Indies and outside of the University of the West Indies in the wider sphere. For many years, Sir Alistair McIntyre has been the patron of University Diabetes Outreach Program, UDAP, and he has maintained keen interest in the work of UDAP and diabetes in general. We recently visited Sir Alistair to find out what he has been up to. Good morning, Sir Alistair.
Good morning, and what a great pleasure to see you again.
Very nice to see you, looking absolutely spiffy.
Well, that's not my doing. Others in my household look after that.
Wonderful. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want to go back a bit to those years. You came to the University of the West Indies in 1998, and you reminded me that it was around the time of Gilbert. Tell me what happened then.
Well, it was a traumatic experience because certainly, although I had some notion of what bad weather was like from previous experiences in the Caribbean, my children, of course, who had largely grown up in Europe, had no such experience. So it was quite a scene to get my wife and children and myself all in one bed.
Wow.
While outside the wind and the rain were raging and creating any amount of havoc. Mm-hmm. But I have to say that despite the initial shocks, we managed to survive ourselves, as indeed the country itself did, which was the country's response to Gilbert was very impressive. Mm-hmm. Concerned about the damage that has been done, trying as best as possible with the resources available to deal with it, and on the whole, made a number of important advances in improving the infrastructure as a result of the recovery programs that were put in hand.
All right. Well, in terms of the University of the West Indies, Mona, what did you find yourself involved in with this sort of baptism of fire, as it were, to a new setting? How did you? It was not new for you, because you used to be in the economics department, if my memory serves me right.
That's correct, yes. I was there in calmer times, of course.
Okay.
But I joined the department in 1960, mm-hmm. and I spent 4 years there, then moved on after a spell of a sabbatical to St. Augustine, where I was chairman of the Division of Social Sciences, mm-hmm. and helping also to start economics at Barbados. So I'd leave St. Augustine at 6 o'clock in the morning, catch a 7 o'clock flight to Barbados, have a cup of tea, and go and teach until 10 o'clock, and then took a flight at 10:30 back to Trinidad, and by 11:30 I was teaching again at St. Augustine.
Awesome. I mean, really,
I was young then.
You were young and in the jet set.
Well, I wouldn't say quite the jet set. Because although it was very pleasurable in a way, it was very hard work.
I can imagine.
Having to do that and then to go and face a full program of teaching and administration at St. Augustine. At the time there were, I think, 3 of us in the department, and we had quite an ambitious program. So there you go. I was young and I was keen and went on with it.
Wonderful. So coming to Mona, that was good preparation for you, for Mona and all the excitement that came with your arriving at the time of Gilbert.
Yes.
And a lot of damage control and so on you'd have to do.
Yes.
Okay.
It was quite a challenge. Mm-hmm. I, of course, in the period during which I was at the United Nations, on 1 or 2 occasions, the Secretary General asked me to deal with certain developments that had occurred in member states that required a special program of rehabilitation. I did 1 or 2 of those in Africa. Mm-hmm. Helpfully, they both came off fairly well. So I had a notion of what one needed to do faced with an emergency situation.
Disaster. like this, of that enormity. Okay, wonderful. Now, speaking about University of the West Indies, the University Diabetes Outreach Program, you had a lot to do with it, with the creation of making it possible for it to come to pass. Professor Errol Morrison, he wasn't professor then, he was Dr. Errol Morrison, who had a vision for creating this entity which would teach, educate persons who were involved in providing health care and the diabetes, and also lay persons who would have an interest in serving in that area. What was your role in you know, I think your role was one of facilitator in getting the UDOP started. Tell me about that.
Well, when I came, one of my desires was to get to know intimately what each staff member was doing, both in the classroom and outside of it. And Professor Morrison came to see me, and I was very impressed to find that a young lecturer in the Department of Biochemistry then was thinking ahead of how he could arrange greater service to the community, and in particular in diabetes, which was his emerging specialty. He came to see me, and I was very impressed with his enthusiasm, his vision, and so on. So I said to him, well, the first thing you need to do, which I suppose is why you're talking to me today in part, is to raise some money. Because I said you need money for equipment, you need money to house the entity you want to set up, etc. He said yes. So I said, well, go and write me a proposal.
Okay.
So he went and wrote the proposal, and he brought it. Well, I told him, give it to me because I'm going to London very soon, and I'd like to have it with me. And he did so. And I went to London, and talking to colleagues and old friends and so on, they said, I said, I need to raise quite a bit of money for the damage, you know. And then say, but I also need to raise some money for development. So he said, what do you have in mind? I said, well, the most immediate thing I have in hand is a very interesting program to develop care for diabetes.
That was good. That was fortuitous.
And so they said, well, we'd suggest you go and see this goodly gentleman who had a foundation. And I went to see him, and he read it, and he said, this is very interesting, and he asked some more questions, and he said, all right, I will give you, I think he said £500,000.
50?
Huh?
Wasn't 50,000?
No.
It's 500,000.
He did say so.
Oh, okay.
So I said, well, I haven't asked you for that. I was planning to ask you for 250. He said, yes, but that is for Jamaica, but I believe you have campuses elsewhere. So I said, yes, I have in Trinidad and in Barbados. So he said, well, we are already contributing to a program in Trinidad, so I would agree to do something in Barbados. Well, that never came to pass. That's a separate thing. But I said, well, let us start with what is in existence. Dr. Morrison is ready to go. And he said, okay, I'll give him £250,000. So when I came back, I think Dr. Morrison had to hold on to his chair because he wasn't quite expecting so quick a result.
Wonderful.
But he moved into it, and within a very short period of time, he had a organization set up, he had programs devised, and he began outreach program, and concurrently planning the building.
At the Diabetes Association.
Diabetes building, where it is now.
Donor Avenue, yes.
That's
it was
correct.
An extension, that's the operationalization of the UDOP idea.
That's correct. And he had a group of very enthusiastic people, Jamaicans, supporting it. And I was over the top to think that we could start the program because I had an interest in it, if I may put it that way, being a diabetic myself. And nothing gave me greater pleasure than to see the speed with which that building was put up and an active program started. No amount of praise is too much for Professor Morrison in the energy and dedication that he applied to get that program active.
So we're talking about the Diabetes Center at 1 Donor Avenue, Kingston, which is a one-stop shop.
Yes.
For all the needs of
Absolutely.
persons who need diabetes care. They have a professional for every area. And as we know, diabetes affects just about every part
of one's body.
Yes, and you could give us lectures about that.
Yeah, I don't want to spend the program talking about my problem.
No, we're not going to talk about your problem, but I would love for you to enlighten us about some things. Maybe a couple tips are here a little bit further on about how, you have taken care of yourself, or you've been taken care of by your caregivers, medical, nursing, and of course, family. So you have type 1 diabetes. And you require insulin every day, and you follow a particular regime. Tell me a little bit about what that is about.
Well, I have a regime that requires, of course, not exceeding a certain level of calorie intake, and of course to avoid fatty foods and of course sugary foods, of course. But it's not just the actual consumption of the food that you eat, but it is also what one does in support of that. And one critical factor, which I have to say, over the years I've tried my best to follow, but not always with as much success as I should have tried to get, that exercise. Exercise is very important. You need to have a steady diet, well organized, and follow it carefully. Avoid fatty foods, starchy foods. Try and restrict your intake of those. Actually, if you're on insulin, as I was.
You say was. Aren't you still on insulin?
Yes, I still am.
Okay.
As I am, I should say. You have to be very careful as how you balance off your intake of sugar against the anti-sugar.
Yeah. So you take insulin once a day or twice?
Twice.
Twice, morning and evening?
Morning and evening.
Okay.
And to that I have to add a very carefully designed program of food. My wife is very helpful in that, as is the housekeeper. Between the two of them,
yes,
they make sure Christine.
Has been around, what, 18 years? Or
as long as we were, for a very long time.
How long have you had diabetes?
My first indication that I had some kind of diabetic condition was in 1947.
Okay.
It was very short-lived, but I knew that it posed some degree of trouble for me because my mother was diabetic, insulin dependent too. And I used to sit down and shake my head to see the huge syringes that she had to apply every day. But anyway, when I saw the first indications of this was in 1947, but she immediately put me on a diet and exercise, not much medication, and then it disappeared for several years.
It did?
Yes, my sugar was very normal.
Under control. So you came off the medications?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, when I went to the UK and went to the college doctor, he said, "Young man, why are you suggesting that you have diabetes?
Really?
Your sugar levels are perfectly normal."
Wow.
So he said, no, you should, but he said, keep on the exercise, don't get overweight and so on, but you have nothing to worry about. And that was more or less how I had things when I came here in 1960. But of course, coming here in a new environment and both working and living, it seems as if my blood sugars just went up.
Maybe you're so caught up in the other things that you didn't realize what was happening to you.
I was certainly having a nice time. A lot of my friends from student days in England looked after me in that way. And then I had this sudden and sharp increase in my blood sugar levels. And the doctor then looking after UE staff, Dr. Dyer, said, I have to get a further sounding on your situation. And he sent for Dr.
Ralph Richards?
No, Ralph was number 2.
Errol Morrison?
No, he was from Antigua.
Who's that now? I don't know.
Oh, Lord.
Not getting a name. But
Anyway.
We'll come back.
It will come back. He came, looked at the results, which Dyer showed him, and he said, I want you to go into hospital immediately.
Really?
And I said, well, let me go home and get my wife. I said, no, we look after that. You go up there now. And so I went. I was quite scared, actually. And
That's your first hospitalization?
Hospitalization for 3 weeks.
Wow.
At the university hospital. And he put me on a regular starting regime of food and stuff like that. I was very distressed because I used to enjoy having a scotch and soda at the end of every day.
Really no.
And that disappeared through the window.
Wow. You had withdrawal symptoms?
Well, not really. I realized that I had to be careful. So that went on, and he had me on insulin for a month. At the end of it, he said, you know, your readings are quite satisfactory, and I'm going to scale it down. And then he scaled it down over a period of another 6 weeks, and then he said, I'm going to stop it all together and put you on tablets. So I thought this was the greatest news I'd heard for a long time. He liberalized my diet a little bit, and the weekend scotch returned
Really?
to remain in place for quite a long time after. But anyway, I was on that situation when he left the University of the West Indies because he went into private practice. And he said to me, look, I'm available to you, your friends, to call me at any time, but there's a very good doctor at the university whom I want to introduce you to. That was Ralph Richards. Mm-hmm. So Ralph came on board and remained with me until I left Mona to start with, and then later on, he left and went to Trinidad. Mm-hmm. And he died there, unfortunately, so I had to start again to find a fairy godfather. But at the time he came on, the next time, my situation had deteriorated. And he said to me, look, I don't have you on insulin now, but I think you may have to go on insulin. So he sort of prepared me. And I was working some very incredible hours at the UN at the time. My normal day of work was do a day's work at the office, and at 9 o'clock, I had to superintend a negotiation which ended at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I went home, had a shower, light breakfast, and back again.
That's UNCTAD.
At UNCTAD. Well, that went on for some months. Then I became aware of the fact that my physical condition had deteriorated. So I went to see a doctor at the Cantonal Hospital in Geneva, Dr. Sal, who was the specialist.
Yes, I met him.
And he took me over completely, restructured my treatment, had me in hospital for 3 weeks, and then restructured my treatment and had me on a very regular period of surveillance, broken only by the fact that again I went into another negotiation which was even more difficult than the last one. And when that was finished, he said, I think you deserve something special.
Not a drink of scotch.
No. But he sent me off to a recuperation center in France, which was excellent. I spent 3 weeks there, and when I came out of there, I couldn't believe I was the same person. Really very excellent. And he said, you are to go there for the same period every year. And he wrote this to the United Nations. Could you make arrangements for Mr. McIntyre to go back for 3 weeks every year?
Wow.
And the Secretary General approved it. Mm-hmm. And so while I was in Geneva, I went there just after Easter for 3 weeks. And it was really one of the most wonderful recuperation experiences I've ever had.
Wonderful.
It was absolutely
Wonderful.
The combination of exercise, diet, rest was beautifully organized, and all of the people in there were executives who had overworked themselves. So I made
That was
quite a
their
few
little
friends.
Their little secret.
Yes, it was expensive. Ewan was very kind to do it, but
All right. So
nonetheless,
you've had your high points and
high and low.
high and low. I won't ask you what point you're at now, but looking at you, one would never know that you're having any low points.
Well,
But I'm sure you have your daily challenges.
well, I have my challenges all the time, but the question is that after all these years, I was calculating it in case you asked me, but I have been declared diabetic under treatment since 1961. Well, that, according to my, it's something like 56 years.
Awesome, awesome. I think maybe you hold a record.
Well, I don't know. I met some people who really scared me when they told me how long they had been.
Really? And I'm sure they don't look as good as you.
Much better. If you speak to my critics, they'll tell you I don't look my old self at all. So, you know.
Well, we reserve comments. As far as I can recall.
You're discreet.
No, I've known you from many years back at UWI. And your brain is ticking fine, and I think that's the most important thing.
I think I need more than my brain to enjoy life.
Talking about the brain now. You're still using your brain. I know you're writing your books. You finished one?
Yes.
It's
it was
been
published.
published?
Yes.
Yes. What's the name of that one?
The Caribbean and the Wider World.
Okay.
And it was out, came out last Christmas.
Okay.
And at the moment, I am working with 3 other colleagues on bringing out my papers. I have about 80 papers that I want to publish.
As a collection?
Yes, we'll do them in volumes.
Okay.
And I have my former executive assistant right here now this weekend to help me in the initial phase of sorting out. It's a big job.
Yes.
I don't want to think about it right now.
Well, okay. Well, it's been nice having this little reprieve from your work. I know it's been difficult catching up with you. We've been trying to do this for a little while. Weather has permitted us to do this, and your availability, well, which you made possible. So just want to thank you so much, Sir Alistair, for allowing us this opportunity to learn so much from you and to share with you, and wish you Godspeed with your book, and I'm sure it's going to be a bestseller.
Well, I wouldn't mind that at all.
Yes, yes.
But let me also take this opportunity of expressing my deep appreciation to you for what you are doing for diabetes, what you have been doing. I have been most impressed by your continuing enthusiasm, your persistence in making sure that one does what you would like one to do. And I hope that you would continue on this important work for a long time to come.
Thank you so much. As long as
and meeting your very talented daughter adds to the pleasure that I have in seeing you again.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sir Alistair. Shake hands.
And thank you.
Good.
All the best.
And on that thank you note, let me just say thank you so much to my crew, Andre Forbes, his assistant, Ishmael Preston, and Kayla Shaw, our art director, for the effort they've put into this production. I am Jean Shaw. Thank you for listening.